Get Out and Drive podcast. We are here at PRI 2022 with Bob Ashton. You are the founder of Muscle Car and Corvette Nationals.
Absolutely, that's my real job.
Fondly referred to as MCACN.
Exactly.
By everybody who wants to know. So, why are you here at PRI today?
Well, it's all about networking, as you know.
Hell yeah!
Shaking hands, kissing babies, and all that type of thing. But
right.
I live and breathe everything on wheels, basically.
Okay.
So anything that's related to cars, that's what I'm doing on the weekend, whether it's work related or not.
Okay.
Because out here, we're seeing all kinds of people that we know, and making plans for the next couple of years with my show.
I'm glad we can get together today.
Great. I've been wanting to get together and talk to you about having a little presence at my show.
Oh, that's great. Let's talk about history of MCACN.
Absolutely.
I know it's been kind of moving around, kind of bumpy. But
the long and short of it is a lot of people ask how the show started, and I was a show manager for the Championship Auto Shows, which is the World of Wheels and Autorama people.
I'm very
quite
familiar.
A few years. And in fact, we were talking about Chicago. I was
Bob Larrabee?
Absolutely. Bob Larrabee Senior. Cubby was right next door to mine and back in Auburn Hills. And basically, over the years, to make a long story short, my passion has always been in factory muscle, American muscle in the 60s and 70s. And I was show manager for Championship Auto Shows and went from city to city overseeing the production of the shows. And
I was involved with ISCA in St. Louis in the mid to late 90s and 2000s.
Right. Yeah.
And we did a lot of setups and things at the convention center at the Dome in St. Louis. I was very involved with that.
And some great people out there, too. As my wife calls it, that was my college education and show promotion.
I see.
Trial
by fire.
Exactly.
Yes.
So I had Dallas Autorama, Pittsburgh World of Wheels, Chicago World of Wheels, quite a few different cities that I would travel throughout and oversee the production.
Okay. But you were always in the show car end of it, the glitz and glamour.
Correct, yeah.
Correct, because I'm a body man and restoration guy for 30-some years, but you're talking about paint daub correct, everything overspray, perfect, ridiculously over-restored type of mirror under the car vehicles.
Right.
As is with ISCA cars that are spinning around and, chrome muffler bearings and all that garbage.
Well, yeah, what had happened, the Championship Auto Shows had purchased the Chevy Vet Fest, which is obviously a little bit more geared towards more of the stock cars and Corvettes and whatnot. Right. And when they purchased the show from the long-term owners, they had the show for over 20 years, and major emphasis on Corvette, a little bit less emphasis on the non-plastic cars of Chevy.
Right. Okay.
What I like to say is I kind of changed the focus a little bit and made it more of the Chevy Vet Fest instead of the Chevy Vet Fest.
Yeah.
Meaning a little bit more emphasis on the Camaros, the Impalas, the Chevelles, and that type of thing.
Yes.
And part of the reason for that was I wanted to see a little bit of a younger crowd.
Okay.
And
less New Balance sneakers.
You got it.
Okay.
And I love Corvettes. I've owned them over the years.
Right.
But you can see the demographic of the typical Corvette owner was typically a little bit older than it would be for the Camaros.
Yes.
And when we did that, we saw quite a bit of a change in who was coming through the doors as a spectator at the shows.
Yes.
And so my thought was, if you could make this work with one single brand, what would happen if you opened this up to Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, and made it a multi-make deal.
Right.
In 3 years, and on the third year of me pitching that concept, they felt that it wasn't a good long-term deal, and there wasn't a whole lot of interest in the muscle car world.
Oh, they were still more ISCA show car oriented.
Exactly.
Okay.
Not that there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a different type of thing. Kind of blew the air out of my balloon, I guess you could say, and sat down and we should go out and do this on our own. And at that time, my title sponsor for Chevy Vet Fest was Stefano Bimbi out of Chicago.
Okay.
Had heard my dream of having this muscle car show, and When I told him that it wasn't going to happen, he kind of was blown away, and he was like, "What do you mean they don't want to do this? What's the deal with this?"
How could they not find value in it?
Well, that's kind of what we thought, and again,
I mean, with all of the, not to knock on everybody else's things, but with all the big Super Chevy shows, all that stuff, there's room for everyone.
Well, and that's what I thought. And the other thing that was happening at that time, if you step back a few years, you had the new Camaro coming out.
Okay.
So you had new interest, a new crowd, a younger crowd again.
Right. With all the retro cars.
The retro Mustang.
Right.
You had the new Challenger coming. So all of a sudden you've got this focus on factory muscle again.
Sure.
And with the appeal coming to a younger crowd.
Right.
How does that not work?
It's the perfect storm.
Exactly.
It's absolutely ridiculous.
So that kind of is what happened. He said, in his words, he said, "Put your life on hold for 24 hours and call me tomorrow."
Okay.
Didn't really know what he had in mind, but he had heard me talking about the story of my dream, and made a few calls to some key people. And before I knew it, 24 hours later, he called up and said, "How would you like to launch that show?" And I said, "I would love to do it."
He had some stuff brewing.
I'm like, it's a whole lot of money, and quite honestly, I'm not a man that has a lot of money.
Okay.
And he said, "Well, if we did have the money and we had the investors, would you give it a go for a year?"
Right.
And it was like, "Well, absolutely." Next thing I knew, there was a large deposit in my bank account. I was heading to Rosemont to sign a contract.
Oh, wow. Very nice.
That's how the show started.
Wow. That's incredible, because I've always been a big follower of that and a follower of what you've done. And getting a muscle car show of all makes together, U.S. muscle car show, is a great feat.
Well, there's so much passion and enthusiasm. You know, everybody has a story.
Right.
And, my son, who's 38 now, he grew up in that, and he's kind of the exception to the rule. But now we're finding a lot of younger people of his age and even a little bit younger getting into it. And a lot of that was drawn in by the Camaro and the Mustang and the Challenger. They're looking at that and seeing these new hot cars and then saying, "Hey, where did this come from?"
Sure.
Well, let's look at a 70 Hemi Challenger or a Cuda or a Copo Camaro.
Right.
And then they're finding out there's a whole lot more to it.
Right.
And it's feeding the frenzy, I guess.
And that's what we're always pushing at Get Out and Drive podcast, is support the next generation.
Absolutely.
What drives youth.
Right.
And to make sure that you pass on information to your son and maybe other people and become a mentor for the next generation, as I'm doing. And we really try and beat that drum.
Well, it's something that I say a lot, and people that have heard me talk before, they get tired of hearing it, but I always say that our show has become what I call the great equalizer. What I mean by that is, as you know and you've heard, there are many multi-million-dollar cars on our show. I think last November, we walked in with a Hemi Cuda convertible that hadn't seen the light of day since 1978.
Yep.
The average price on a Hemi Cuda convertible, the range is $2 to $5 million plus right now.
Sure.
Here's one, greeting you at the door. Sebring Race 1960 Corvette, again, multi-million-dollar car. The owners of these cars are just like you and me. They're passionate enthusiasts. They're wearing T-shirts and jeans.
Right.
Somebody comes in, they're more than happy to look and feel and touch the cars, and pull on the shifter.
Right.
And that's very different than any other hobby. And to me, that's something that when you're talking about Get Out and Drive and you're talking about the younger generation, this is what we need to do, is encourage that next generation. And in my case, even my grandchildren are now into it.
Right.
And, making sure that when we see that kid that might be looking over the rail or checking something out, say, "Hey, come on in here. Put him in the seat. Have him yank on that pistol grip shifter and set the tone and get the wheels turning."
And I think that's great, because of the polar opposite, don't touch ISCA mentality.
Right.
And like I said, polar opposite is get a kid in the car. Some of the most fun I've ever had at a car show was bringing a patina vehicle, or I brought my son's muddy dune buggy, VW dune buggy, to a car show in St. Louis. It had mud falling off the sides of it, and we parked next to some sort of billet street rod.
Right.
And the kids would come up, and we're like, "Hey, You want to get in the dune buggy.
I love it, yeah.
We grab them, stick them in the dune buggy, put the harness on, and everything, and their parents are taking pictures, and that is what sparks the kids' imagination, and they may remember that and say they want a dune buggy, or they want a hot rod, or they want something.
Well, even, one of the things we do, we do what I call a show within a show with the muscle bicycles. Because for me as a kid, 1964 is when I got my first Schwinn Stingray.
Oh yeah, the Stingray crates, man.
To the mini bikes and led into the cars and the go-karts and eventually cars. And that's another reason we do that type of thing is, I often see dad or grandpa with their kid looking at these cool old 60s Stingrays and crate bikes and all that, asking, well, what's that thing in the middle? What's that lever?
Why?
And then we're explaining to
They've
them
never had a chance to hands-on use it.
Exactly. And that's so important now to set the tone for the future. I plan on doing this for a long time, and that's one way that you and I and all the listeners can do is to promote that and pay attention and see there is a lot of interest out there right now.
Yeah, we always dig and we try and find out what is a person's spark. What was that key moment in your life where you're hanging out, not doing anything, and you're a child, and then all of a sudden you figure it out and you say, this day is what made me to make a left turn.
Absolutely.
And it'll be there forever. Exactly. And that's when I remember, that's my spark, and I said, hey, this is what I want to do as a living. This is what I want to do. Before we get further, what was your spark? Do you remember what happened?
Many of them. I grew up in a Chrysler family. My father was the vice president and general manager of Chrysler Insurance. So and I explain this to people. My dad was a Chrysler guy. He was not a car guy.
Right.
What I mean by that was if it had a Pentastar, it was the best thing in the world. But if you pulled up in a Camaro and said, Dad, come out and look at the new Challenger, he would say, that's the best car in the world. He would know the difference between a Camaro and a Challenger.
I understand.
But funny story that I often tell is my aunt, or her boyfriend at the time, who became her husband, was a Chevy guy. So my first ride in a 4-speed car was a 69 L78 Chevelle with a 4-speed. And I'll never forget that moment when he would tell me, he goes, you want to feel a real fast car? Let's go for a ride in this one. Your brother don't have nothing on me.
Wow.
And he took me for a ride in that Chevelle, and I remember my head slamming back against the headrest. And I'm 62 years old now, and it's just like, that's like it happened yesterday. And I remember the color and the ride and the sensation that I had. Set the tone right then.
I've been restoring cars for 30-some years, and people laugh at me all the time, and you won't, but sticking your head inside an unrestored car. I can close my eyes, I can tell you what a Volkswagen smells like. I can tell you what a Chrysler car smells like. Ford, in some sort of 70s or 80s import, they smell different.
That's correct.
Because of different materials and different things and this and that. Kind of moving into that, talk to us about the unrestored Survivor barn find class.
We have so much
and then I'm sure we'll kind of work into our friend Ryan Brutt.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, Ryan Brutt, autoarchaeologist.
Good friend of ours, and I remember long before Ryan ever wrote a book, we go way back with him. I had a unique experience at my show. I've always been drawn to that type of car long before I had a show, just from an educational standpoint.
Was that portion of your show with you from the beginning?
Well, it was about the third or fourth year. What happened was a gentleman who was a big Corvette collector called me, and he said, hey, I got this car, and it's not really the show car type of thing, but it's kind of interesting. It might be a lot of fun for you. Okay, what do you have? Somebody said, hey, my buddy's in a 67 Corvette. This car's got some value. Went there and found this car, literally snow tires, 4 flat tires. They pulled it in the garage, parked it, and it sat there since 1972. So he went on to explain that he had just discovered the 67, 427, 435 Goodwood Green 4-speed. He was so taken by the car, he was afraid to make it shiny, and that was his original intent, was to take it back and restore it. Called me up on it and said, what do you think about having me bring this car in here as a display, kind of like a before and after? I'll bring it in now, and then I'm going to bring it back after it's restored.
Understood.
And I thought, that's a home run. We can have so much fun with that car. So he literally, I said, don't wipe it down, don't do anything.
Don't touch it.
Don't clean it.
Right.
air up the tires so we can push it.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what he did. I can tell
He
you.
had it there with the snow tires on it.
And it was a hit. It was the talk of the show. And
Sure.
several of my partners thought I had lost my mind. They're like, why would you want this dirty old crusty Corvette in there? And I said, just watch.
Watch
what
this.
happens. And it ended up one of them actually bought the car. But,
wow.
that's how that all started. We
Okay.
saw the reaction and how much fun people had with it. It's like, you know, we can take this a step further.
Right.
Then we launched our, what we call Barn Finds and Hidden Gems.
Wow. Excellent. Well, how can our listeners and viewers, how can they find you to be at MCACN or to be part of your show? How can they find you?
Really easy. Our website is MCACN.com. So
okay.
MCACN is Muscle Car and Corvette Nationals, which we know is a long name. So
very cool.
MCACN.com, and I also post on Facebook almost every day. So
okay.
There's so much to talk about. I put something new up there all year round.
Awesome. Well, thanks for hanging out with us in the Racing Junk booth today at PRI 2022. Hope to see you around. See you at MCACN 2023.
Absolutely.